Hi, everybody. This is Dazza Greenwood from the MIT Media Lab, but actually at Harvard Law School in the Berkman Center, where a number of us came over for a great AI lunch talk today. It's a connection between the Berkman Center and the Media Lab, where we talk about ethics and law and artificial intelligence. And off camera here, I'm joined by some great members of our community and some visitors from OECD in Paris. And it's great here at the Berkman Center. So this is an experiment to try allowing some of our online, some of the breakout discussions to continue online. And for this first week, we're going to kind of do it all together. But then in subsequent weeks, some of these topics and then some other topics that aren't represented here, but that occurred at the MIT Legal Forum last week, we'll have an opportunity to talk. And then probably what we anticipate will happen is we'll have some concurrent sessions so that we could have, several people really go deep into their topic. And we might use Google on Hangout or other technology so we can start as a big group and end as a big group, but then let people go into their individual lanes. So with that, we've got three today. The very exciting personal data and identity ownership dialogue that Elizabeth Ramirez and Tony and Christian and others had put together, and then automated legal entity with the C4 gang, among others, and Professor Goodenough passes on his regrets for today, but wishes us well on that. I think he's actually on the West Coast now, and then the computational law challenge, and then. But before we get started, could we just do a very quick round of hi, like just hellos and my name is and what your topics are. I scrupulously avoided putting Tony Lai into any particular group because he's sort of like he's the star player that could sort of like switch it into like any role. So Tony, do you mind, as our friend and longtime collaborator, just get us started and say who are you and what you into? Oh. No volume from you, Tony. Okay, so we'll come back to you, Tony, and Marcy, who's on also the correct left coast with Tony. Could you introduce yourself and please?
Sure. I think I have it.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, Marcy Harris. I'm co-founder of Breakouts, which is a civic tech platform to help people find out about legislation. Non-practicing lawyer, but I'm very interested in how data is used in policymaking. So excited to work on the computational law challenge.
And credits to you, Marcy, for bringing that up at the end of day one as a topic we should talk about to really allow people to talk about it over dinner and then to bring it up in force that next day. So thank you, and I'm so excited to be working with you on it. Tony, are you online now? Oh gosh, not yet. Okay, and I know that you have to go in a few minutes. So if you have to go before we can hear your voice, just know that we're grateful that you're here and want to work with you on everything. And then Elizabeth, you're up. I'm just going in order of the little boxes on my screen.
Thanks, Dazza. Yeah, so Elizabeth Ramirez, technology privacy lawyer with interest in cross-border data protection and emerging technologies like blockchain, AI, machine learning. I have practiced in the US, London, and the Middle East. So I'm really interested in sort of competing frameworks on these subjects and how these emerging technologies are going to sort of change our data ownership models entirely, which is something that we will get into in my portion of the session. Thanks for having me, Dazza.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a great session you had. And then next person we've got on the line here is Dylan. And are you, let's see if we can hear you. Dylan is of C4 Coin, and I see you. Yep, sound check. Okay, no sound yet. Dylan is a terrific person with a mellifluous, smooth voice that I hope you'll all enjoy shortly. So Damon, you're up.
Sure. My name's Damon. I work with community banks. I'm foreign exchange primarily, but I'm now in charge of monetizing their data So that's one leg of it. And I'm also just an angry citizen after Equifax and a number of other hacks. So I'm working on deleting and hopefully collecting my own data from all these various brokers and putting it in one place. And looking forward to see how we all can work together, because I think it's going to be more of a consortium approach. One group can't do it, I don't think.
Here, here. And Damon was also one of our star students in the first Future Law MIT course. And this was a student project of his that you know, had some twists and turns, but it's one that I hope that would be a good match for Elizabeth's breakout. So thank you. I'm glad that you could join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And then last but not least, at least on this first go round, is Christian Smith.
Hey, Daza. Yeah, that's me. I am not a lawyer. I am a software engineer, though, and I'm principally concerned with cryptographic protocols and privacy technology and trust networks and that sort of thing. So this is very interesting, particularly around the architecture of cryptographic credentials, and also the architecture of personal storage to be implemented in such a way that it's aligned with privacy laws and actually effective at doing what we want. So
here. So and also perfect match for Elizabeth. Oh yeah, you've got it too. And so like Pip, wherever you are, like thank you, God bless you. Come back to America sometime soon, and then hack with us online. All right then. So why don't we just get started with you, Elizabeth? Can you maybe just walk us through this topic, and then and we can screen share as well.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if Tony wants to go quickly or if you've got sound. I don't want to. No, okay. Okay, we'll dive right in then. So I don't know if everyone can access the document. I can go ahead and screen share it if that's better.
That would be great.
Okay. Is that working?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So this basically came about in talking to Daza about how someone in the US would go about trying to access personal data that's out there in the universe about them. And initially, it seems like a fair enough question, and then you start looking into it, and it becomes exceedingly complex. And sort of as a background to this, I just want to present the framework to think about all of this in the US, which is that because we don't have a comprehensive, wholesale, general right of privacy that's embedded in statute in the US, and we'll keep the constitutional rights aside for now, in order to exercise your data subject access rights, you have to rely upon independent and disparate specific laws that apply to data depending on your role in society. So the way that I've organized this document is basically as a catalog, and I've just started it, so it's early days, as a catalog of the laws, federal and state, and categories of laws that might apply to your ability to access your data depending on the hat that you're wearing. So for example, the categories I've started with are consumers, we'll get back to the citizens point, employees, parents, patients, students, and then I started thinking about other categories, so foreigners, those outside the US, and then the impact of new technologies and potentially not roles that aren't even in existence at this point. So just from this initial, and please feel free to interrupt or stop me if there are any questions as I go. Even from this initial, document, you can see that there's this really tangled web, this really complex web of laws, sector-specific laws that are implicated. And I don't have full excerpts of the statutes here, but all of the links are embedded to the actual language of the law and the relevant sections. So if you start to go through and click on some of the links and just have a look at some of the language and some of the requirements, you start to get a sense of just how onerous and almost unreasonable it would be for an individual to really try and compile a good and accurate picture of all the data that's out there on them. But putting aside sort of the logistical concerns for now, I think there's a couple of other philosophical points that I wanted to mention, which are that you have to find sort of an applicable law or an applicable category of data or context to access certain data. So it's not just that anyone that has data out there on you, has a legal requirement to provide it. And as Damon's already mentioned, you can very well be met with resistance if there's no sort of express right to that data. And this just demonstrates how we really don't have a model of data ownership, of individual data ownership in the US, where you're actually the owner of the data that you are creating, despite the fact that your data footprint, in the modern age is so extensive and is being cataloged and packaged and sold and resold by data brokers and others, much to their commercial and strategic benefit, whereas the individual is really at a disadvantage in trying to adequately take stock of their data picture. So if you go through, you can see that the rights are fairly limited. So for example, if we go to FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you have certain rights: the right to an annual credit report, the right to remove certain information, correct certain information. But if you click on the link to annualcreditreport.com, or you go to any of the providers, you start to see how complex it can actually be. Daz is doing something in here.
Sorry, I'm making like a clean table of contents to your brilliant masterwork.
Okay, that's great.
But not too good.
And feel free to stop me if this is not going in the direction that you intended.
It's going in the direction that we intended. Okay,
great. So, so I think it's really interesting from a philosophical point of view that rather than being viewed as an individual who has their own autonomy and sovereignty, who can control the data that they themselves are generating, we view the individual as this fragmented actor in society who, really has to assert themselves in a context-specific way to jump through all these hoops and hurdles just to see personal data about themselves. So when you think about that, you can, you start to see why it feels like the system is broken. At the end of this document, where I started to think about other categories, foreigners came to mind because I was starting to think about the GDPR, which was the subject of one of the breakout sessions at the recent conference at MIT. And we all know that the GDPR is going to have far-reaching effect because pretty much anyone being able to access your website or app or digital services from the EU will bring you within the GDPR's reach. And so you start to think about a very different perspective that you have in the EU, where there is a wholesale, comprehensive, general right to privacy, and the privacy and data subject access rights attached to an individual as one person of integrity. And so it doesn't matter whether the data controller is in the consumer sector, is an employer, you have a right to data that data controllers and data processors have and process about you as an individual. And you are able to assert those rights in one uniform way, particularly under the GDPR. If you look at Chapter 3 on the rights of the data subject, you will now have one wholesale comprehensive way of exercising these rights across the EU. And one thing to keep in mind is that the GDPR, unlike the current privacy directive, has direct effect in the EU, which means that it should, in theory, iron out all the discrepancies across national laws within EU member states. So you start to see the real culture clash here between the approach to privacy and data protection in the US and the approach to privacy and data protection in jurisdictions like the EU. And then you also see how this clash really comes to a head in the digital environment and in an economy of personal data. I'll stop here for questions because I realize this is a lot of information before we move into sort of the technology questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, Dazzle.
Oh, thanks. So is there any common thread that you've noticed as you've been doing this excellent work, compiling this very actionable, I'd say, drill down into legal rights in the United States for, they're in some ways comparable to like GDPR type rights. Anything that's common in terms of like what an individual would have to do to identify and authenticate themselves to an entity that has their data, so that the entity can feel comfortable and with like answering that person, as opposed to giving away and actually like harming the person by telling some third party, maybe like a fraud artist or disgruntled ex-spouse or some like who knows, someone that's not that person that's acting with an intent to commit a crime or a fraud. What's the commonality for the requirements or like the for like reasonable reliance on an entity that comes out of the blue and says, "Hi, my name is Bob Smith. Delete my data or give me my data." Like, is there any commonality here, especially common technical, common kinds of requirements or due diligence that could be translated perhaps to technical requirements and tools and services that could be built?
You're breaking up there, but I think I got the gist of the question.
Great.
So my perspective is that there may be more than we realize, but because the laws are drafted so differently, and because the systems that implement them are so different, it's a more difficult exercise than I initially expected. Hi. So hello. So I think the problem is there's a lot of reliance on sort of what I would call narrative information. So under HIPAA, for example, under FCRA, you'd have to prove sort of historical facts or biographical information. So I've seen some implementations where it's a question of 5 statements of potential fact, correctly identify 3 or 4. There are other implementations where you'd have to provide 2 forms of identification. I personally, and this is not an area I've looked into in great depth in the US, but I have not seen enough uniformity in the means of identifying or proving your identity to even overcome that initial hurdle of an access request. I don't know if others have seen different implementations.
I just had a quick question. So it calls to mind the question for me of like what the liability is for those companies if there is that kind of fraud or violation that Daz is talking about, because it can either be proscriptive that I was like, what's happening on the screen? That there are requirements for how those requests are handled, but then also it could also be handled through liability for the companies if there's just a strong incentive to make sure that that's very secure.
One thing I've seen is, insurance policies that provide a certain degree of coverage. I guess, is the question more protections for the individual or for the company? Liability for the company.
Just a general question of, is the liability tough enough that it makes the companies be especially stringent on this point, or is it still kind of wild, wild west so that companies have various standards because they're not too concerned about the liability piece?
I personally have seen what I would call unconscionable disclaimers. And I mean, I think we've all seen, with Equifax and others, that the risks potentially are more, the liability that comes from a reputational liability and not the law itself isn't providing enough of a remedy. Again, I think that it can even be really difficult for the individual to challenge that, or to know why they're denied an access request, or to know that it's on the basis of or what went wrong with sort of the process. So the lack of transparency there can also disguise a lot of those errors that lead to fraud. But this is not, I think Damon might know more on this point.
I'm learning about it. So the first draft of the letters we sent, we just had name, address, and last four of social, and that seemed to be enough to get them, at least one broker, to delete the data. So we're gonna, I think as we iterate, we're gonna figure out what the standards are for each broker and other types, and then we'll just have a streamlined system to get it done for each one. I think it's going to be a very bespoke process.
Cool. So in the room, Elizabeth, is you remember that nice Chris Mondelaine?
Hi, Chris.
Here's a question.
Hello. So actually, something that you were getting towards. I was just gaming while you were doing stuff.
Right.
But something that you were talking about, or I think you began to talk about, and maybe it was a misinterpretation of the previous question, but I thought maybe could shed some or be an area of opportunity, is the idea around perhaps corporations actually have better legal access to some of this information than individuals, and perhaps if individuals assume the forms of legal entities, that perhaps they'd have some kind of greater access to this information or greater rights in the domain. Smart.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, it would depend on the law, because a lot of the legal frameworks, that the definition of the covered data is that it attaches to an identifiable individual.
We have a
yeah.
I'm going to back up Chris for a moment, which is we just came from this excellent talk at the Berkman Center from who's the professor? A young professor that was talking about infrastructure and treating the internet as public infrastructure, partly, law professor. And one of the things that came up was identity. And we were talking about just this very question of like, how do you, like with the Pony Express and then the US Post Service, we actually have a way that you can get, in effect, a permanent address, a legal address. We have the mailbox rule for presumption that a person got mail within 3 days after it's sent to that address and so forth. Now all that's blown up in the digital age, so we're not sure how to what is due diligence anymore. So one of the people talked about, I've talked about blockchain, people talked about various things, but something I like about what Chris just said, which I hadn't realized before, is think about corporate law for a moment. If you're going to incorporate or be an LLC or other legal entity in a jurisdiction in the United States and other countries that I'm familiar with, one of the things that you have to do is designate a person to whom service can be served for process of service. So you have a designated agent in the jurisdiction, so that if somebody needs to sue you or put you on notice of something like, hey, heads up, we're bulldozing that neighborhood your business is in, or whatever it is, they know who to talk to. And so that's a system that scales and works, and which you have familiar processes. It's well understood. It's reliable. That would be one of the properties that one would have if we like literally did what Chris said and just created like a C Corp or something for every individual, or like a low dollar LLC or something, sole proprietor LLC kind of thing. At least you'd have a place that was designated and on file with a duly authorized state registry service to know where notice should be sent and where notice can come from. That would be authoritative on behalf of that legal entity, in this case an actual human. So that's just one cool property of the incorporation part that actually could theoretically solve the identity issue. It would then cause a lot more expensive problems, like, oh God, $300 to keep my human identity up, and then where do I go to, like, identity jail if I don't pay? Like there's, I think, a lot of ways in which it's not well suited necessarily, but it does have an agent for service of process going for it.
Hey, Daza, on that note, I think we should also look at like data power of attorney designation as well. That might be another route. We can assign a law firm or attorney to, or just a person or a company to manage that whole thing, and that might get around some of the cost prohibitiveness of everyone incorporating.
Yep, good idea. That's good, Damon. So Elizabeth, what else Oh, actually, anybody else? Like Christian, maybe you could open it up a little bit more. Okay, so back to you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to let Christian speak to this. Where I was going with this was, you know, solutions that are based in these emerging technologies, like blockchain, like digital identities, and how that might lower sort of the resource burden and make the management of a personal data store a reality for, you know, most people. So Christian, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Sorry, I had the screen freeze up there a couple minutes ago. I could hear you, but I couldn't respond. So, yeah, I mean, this is really the big question. Is we sort of have to reinvent the entire universe right now in order to get any of this stuff to work, because it depends, firstly, on having these self-sovereign credentials, and there's a really hard technical problem called decentralized key management. That has been the big blocker of being able to do things architecturally around personal data and security in a good way. And because we don't have that, every system that's been built has been architected in a way that is inherently insecure and inherently broken. Like I don't get to keep my data on my own devices. It lives on somebody else's servers and stuff like that. So we really have a lot of reinventing to do and a lot of unpacking of assumptions to do before we can get to this new beautiful world where everything functions the way we would hope it would, back in the old days where we just put things on paper and laws that we have made some sense. And they don't make sense now, and we can't really reconcile the legal and the technical parts of this, partly because we're missing a few critical infrastructure links that have to be solved for it first. So I mean, that was a really good opportunity. We sort of have to do a do-over because everything is fundamentally broken, and it's a really good time to rethink law and technical architectures and infrastructure and incentives and try to get all of those things properly aligned.
Daza, if I could add one thing to that, and also tying in what Chris and Damon were talking about with powers of attorney and, you know, designated agents, I think a lot of people are looking into implementing that with digital identities as well. So some of that could be mirrored in the digital space, and these aren't, from my perspective, you know, mutually exclusive solutions, but they all can be part of sort of a comprehensive new approach, or new deal, as you call it, on our data.
A new deal on data.
A new deal on data.
I'd like to add like an incendiary kind of round. I don't think a lot of people have time to wait for the United States legal system to catch up, and even to wait for technology. One thought process we kind of hatched was, could we convince like Estonia to provide people like Americans a data citizenship just for a price, and then that way we could just be covered under European laws and just kind of smoke a lot of these players out of it in an interim regime until we can figure it out ourselves, I guess. Has anyone thought of that, or is anyone looking into that part?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, am I on mute? Oh, here we are. Oh, there we go. Yes. So Drummond Reed's going to join us in the future, and he's some kind of deputy something or other. He's a deputy for Estonia on their program for e-citizenship, or words to that effect. And he wanted to give a presentation to this breakout on the process of gaining e-citizenship. Somebody sent me an update that indicated that there was a glitch in the system of some type, so they've taken the American ramp to e-citizenship in Estonia down temporarily while they figure out like a security flaw or a bug or something. But there is that something is afoot there. So we should. Hey, Elizabeth, can you add that in the notes there? I guess, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's clever, you know. There's, and then the other thing is, I want to, before we move to the next topic, I want to just ask Elizabeth, do you mind screen sharing again? Or I can do
Did
it.
it go off? Sorry. Let's try that again. Sorry. Does that work?
Yep. Good. And then could you click near the top? I put the list in from Griffin. Yeah, that's it right there. There's an issue that Griffin pulled, issue 4, GitHub issue 4 at the top, higher.
Oh,
right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you then click on Glamrock, is her awesome identity. Right further down in the issue, it's Glamrock Data Brokers. It's linked inside the issue there. Yep, great. This is, oh, and I'm sorry, then actually click the file. So this is, if you scroll down, a terrific, huge list of all these data brokers and the processes that you would go through, like the address, like what you have to do, the sequence of things you have to do in order to request. In this case, it's your data to be deleted, which is kind of the original fire behind the concept that Damon had. In our case, I would like to suggest we consider maybe working together with Damon and Christian and others, and Glamrock if she'll have us. I think Vanna did a good job opening with a charm offensive yesterday at Berkman Center. So I hope that we've opened some good channels and opportunities for partnerships here. But see who would like to work with us to do a data access request. So maybe something along the lines of, my name is, and under whatever laws we could cobble together from Elizabeth that may apply to some of the data brokers or to some people that data brokers have data on, and therefore one way or another the law is applicable, where people are entitled to a copy of their data, and then try to get a copy of that and put it into a personal data store of some vintage and type that Christian could assist us in figuring out potentially, and then just for good measure, delete the data after you give me a copy of it for sure. But the idea of gathering our data from all these disparate sources and then adding to it with things like lat long and our location aware and our medical records and maybe our our other kind of a personal data to be able to do analytics on it and at scale, and to gather together in credit unions and other places to allow this asset class to aggregate its value and have more negotiating power, I think is possible once we get a copy of it. And one way to get a copy of it is through Glamrock's almost like checklist, like guide for all the data brokers. And so she was all too happy to allow us to use her list. It's under a public domain, and her only request is that if we do it, number one, invite her to the party, and then number two, do pull requests. So as we learn more about other sequences or other errors or corrections, just make a pull request back so that we can keep her file updated. So how's all that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. One of the things we were thinking about going after once we kind of figured out the data broker were dead accounts, like dead email accounts that are still out there that are, people are buying and selling that data. And it could be, anything, even maybe even the credit agencies. You can just ask one to just shut it down. So as we get more developed, we can add a Glamrock's database of here are other random databases you're probably on, but you just never deleted your account kind of thing.
Yes. So hey, Elizabeth.
Sorry. Yeah, that one really interesting point on that is that the GDPR carves out dead persons. So there's an interesting question about what will happen to data after the fact.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate phrase, carving out. But yeah, I take your point though.
Agreed.
And that is helpful. And that raises also the question of digital death and the long-term archives and personal data as as it goes through probate, and what the elegant processes are for digital fiduciaries and others who can access accounts to ease that transition, because it is coming. But then what happens to our data? I think it was almost 10 years ago now, I was on a South by Southwest panel, which was good. And the title was, "You're dead. Your data's not. Now what?" And it was we filled the whole room. It was an awesome. But you know what? People are still dying, and we still don't have really a good clue what's going on with the data. So it's something to think about. Hey, Dylan.
On the living person side, just one last piece. Sorry to interrupt. We kind of thought of a concept of data vaccine for my children. So if we can preemptively delete their accounts and opt out of every possible account maybe their data, well, it's impossible to protect all of it, but at least kind of tamp it down.
Okay, so then so like it's more of a life cycle approach. So you've got like the kiddies, the adults, and then the people that used to be alive. Is that more polite? Yeah. Okay. So Elizabeth, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Thanks. Would you be willing to do the show one more another time next week when more people would, I think, hopefully Drummond and some more people that have a lot more to say, even here in Boston and elsewhere, that might be wanting to talk about and more practically how to go from where we are to like a project that we're happy to incubate for you at the Media Lab. Would Thursday, like around this time next week, possibly work for you for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mentioned I'll be on the East Coast, so it works even better. And Drummond and I are collaborating on some things as well, so I can sync up with him, and we can. That was the next phase of the document I was starting, is sort of how do we transform this model and where do we go from here. So happy to do it for sure.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So then I just feel like we should declare this a successful first online breakout meeting of the personal data and individual identity variety. So congratulations, everybody. Like that's done, and like in this one, we should gavel it closed and say it stands adjourned. So awesome. So now looking forward, I see we're almost at. So the other thing I realized is there's no way we can squeeze these things into 15 minutes. I don't know what I was thinking. That's so dumb. So what we should do instead is actually have like the full 50-minute hour. Per topic, and not try to jam more than one into one topic. It doesn't seem to me, but nonetheless, like we do have not only Dylan, but also Harrison Pearl, the CEO of C4Coin, who's the person that's really been driving this concept of I wonder if you wonder like who's calling right now. Like, is it one of you with an emergency that I must pick up, or is it some spam thing? Who knows? If only we had better identity. So let's move forward, and let me ask Harrison, can you get off mute, introduce yourself, and then just give us a quick update on what's going on with the automated legal entity and a concept of potential next steps people could know about and jump into if they wanted to kind of grab an oar and help you row.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. As Daza said, I'm Harrison Pearl, and I'm founder of C4Coin. And yeah, we are absolutely very interested in the idea of an automated legal entity. I think our perspective, it comes from the entrepreneurial side. For us, working on a distributed network, we think an important use case is in terms of onboarding new users, to the extent that there might be legal agreements that come with joining a network. It would be great if, from our end, in a distributed way, those agreements could be made with computerized entities or automated legal entities. And so we left the legal forum the other week with some great progress, a decision that the LLC between incorporation formats is the most flexible and the one to pursue. One of the nice benefits of the LLC is that there are many states in which you don't have to list your members. And so, at least until you file taxes. So we might need to figure that part out. But that was one of that was basically where we had left from the legal forum. So from that perspective, we've been trying to put together a hackathon to, as Daza puts it, create what is the absolute most basic thing that we can call an ALE. Not something that can necessarily fully function on its own, but at least meets the basic requirements of an automated legal entity. And so we've been kind of trying to take pieces away, and what we're really working on is a brainstorming document for a hackathon of coming from our grand idea of being able to enter into legal agreements, onboarding people into a distributed network, to like, what is the core of an ALE? What would be the first thing that we'd want to try to build, especially, you know, in an open source hackathon type situation? And that's basically where we stand there. So, you know, I'd love to open up the conversation. One idea that I had was working with Drummond to use Sovereign perhaps to give a computer its own digital identity and the ability to sign its name somehow.
It's a good idea. So do you have any asks or?
In terms of asks, I guess it's, is there interest in trying to hack something like this together, or is this, you know, because I know for us it will eventually become part of our critical path, and, you know, if we had to, we'd bushwhack it, but we'd rather not see this type of technology become proprietary. And so, you know, to the extent that we can build a community and make these things interoperable, that's a goal. So, you know, gauging interest for actually trying to hack something like this together, and then if so, it'd be great to get more input on a Google Doc to lay out what the parameters of that first hack should look like.
Okay, so do you want to make a Google Doc and invite us to it, and then do a quick screen share, and then the ask would be join the group and help us complete the doc and then hack it into reality?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay, can I come back to you in a few minutes to show us the doc, and then we can split it, and then Marcy, can I kind of pivot to Marcy a little bit on the computational law challenge from GE?
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you very much, Harrison. I'm really glad you're able to join us after all today. Between you and Dylan being here, I just have faith finally that we'll be able to have an automated legal entity, because, you know, with you guys helping to drive it, you absolutely have like my complete support, like whenever it comes up and however it comes up on this, until the thing stands up and it could sue and be sued and just be a proper legal entity, yet that is automated. So, you know, carry on with your groovy self.
Really,
and we'll be right back. Great. Okay, great. Marcy, hey.
Hi.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. So pivoting now to computational law and this challenge prize. Now that you've had a few days to like absorb everything that happened at the Media Lab, and the, you know, the thrill and excitement of, you know, having Christoph from GE on stage there, talking it through, and you're helping us to facilitate dialogue. Have you had any further thought? Could you maybe let people know like a little bit like what is the concept? And then just let us know, like, if you've had any kind of further thoughts on, you know, how would we actually? Well, okay, actually, let me do a quick setup of just what framing, like what is the topic, and then I want to ask if you've had any further thoughts on, you know, how we might be able to approach this, and where the value propositions might be, especially. So, by way of framing, if anybody goes to mitlegalforum.org, everybody can see this excellent session that Marcy helped, as I mentioned earlier, kind of spark into life, with Christoph who's a chief corporate counsel and general counsel for a lot of the innovation stuff at GE, basically proposed that we invent fundamentally a new way to compose and work and promulgate law, such that it's computational by birth. So that it would be like, you know, statistical models and like vectors and parameters, and it would be fundamentally math that is applied. So we can have more adaptive systems that are rules-based, to be sure, but that are not written in like, you know, 17th century prose anymore, but rather are written in the language of the new era of digital society, and so therefore, you know, appropriate as a means of communication of governance of that society. Good idea. And then the idea for a project would be to work with a city initially, or like a sovereign entity of some type that we could help to refactor to be digital. And then Christoph's idea was, what if we found a city that wanted to work with us? And then the project would be to redo like the kernel, like the philosophy kernel, the logic kernel at the base. So maybe it'd be more utilitarian, or maybe we optimize for happiness, we optimize for economics, we optimize for, I don't know, like equality. But you have some kind of a fundamentally political and philosophical notion that would be reflected in the kernel at the lowest level of the operating system. And then you could almost maybe slot in models for traffic and parking, or for sales tax, or for some of the other areas of rules-based governance that would be data-driven. So looking at it like that, he thought we could find a city and then maybe do like a game, something where we could kind of give people some coins or some. You want a chair? Okay. People are piling in, which is nice. We could incentivize citizens or residents of the city to play along and, you know, like drive the cars, or, you know, do their, you know, sales, and then we could get into the system and really kick the tires and be able to maybe the first city is like free, but maybe cities after that could, you know, pay a little something into a pot, and who knows, maybe that could end up being an infrastructure fund of some kind, or some reserve fund that would make it possible to enable better propagation and deployment and maintenance, repair, you know, supply, operation, just like the basic stuff you would want for infrastructure of this type to operate, you know, at scale, but also with the reliability needed to run a city, and also to be appropriate to rule of law and the civil liberties aspects of the social compact that it reflects and supports. So like, it was a really cool idea. And then there was some really great dialogue, and where we think we're going to go with this now is we're just going to do it. So that would involve having some design sessions, and then putting a plan together, getting it out. I'm in contact with the National League of Cities and some other groups now, just to start to propagate the idea and maybe get a little bit of calibrate some feedback. And who knows, if there's a match, maybe see if some mayors or other people might want to, you know, put their hat in the ring. And then the other possibility, people are advising, like, look at all of the Amazon HQ2 cities to see who anyone that put their hat in that ring might be a great city to want to put their hat in the ring of, like, we want to be first to be a computational city. And then there's a bunch of other ideas that are coming online, but I think we would be aiming up to like a second week of January, like computational law palooza at the Media Lab as part of our computational law course. And I have it on very good authority here, right in my little chat box, that Marcy's coming back to the Media Lab and she's going to help us with this. So yeah, thanks again, Marcy, for just breathing life into this thing. And I just want to ask you if you've had any thoughts in the interim, it can just, you know, help us visioneer a way forward.
Oh, absolutely. So for anyone who actually was in that session, at least for me, it was kind of magic. I mean, Christoph laid out a very big vision, and I think also one that had a little bit of ties to like how we might actually take some baby steps on this. I've been thinking a lot about data and modeling and you know, responsive rulemaking and laws in kind of a meta way. But I think what Chris, meaning in kind of a federal big picture, how this would work in a largely implemented way. I think what Christoph, the picture he painted was much more of a, like, how we pilot this to actually figure out how it could work. And I think the idea of starting with a city that's excited about it, that would make their data sets available, that potentially even the citizens could get excited about being a part of it. I kept thinking over the past week about Daza having almost like Nielsen families in the city that might be willing to, you know, provide even some of their own data or answer questions and help us model. Because, you know, if you're going to model how policies might impact people or their happiness or their productivity or their, you know, whatever it happens to be, you're going to need to talk to some people. So I think the concept just, I don't know about you, but it's just been growing and churning ever since we were all together in Boston. So I'm super excited that you guys are going to run with this. I think everybody, or at least lots of folks I talked to about it, is really excited to know that the steps will be taken. And I think some of this is closer than than we think. So I had a conversation with the CIO of Palo Alto last week, and we were talking about how they're going to make their laws digestible by autonomous vehicles when they hit the road pretty darn quick. And so, some of these questions are coming sooner rather than later. So starting to think about infrastructure and being able to model policy both in virtually before it's implemented, but then also have law that's digestible electronically, I think is really exciting.
I have a procedural suggestion that
Marcy picks on you.
Perhaps it would be a good idea to just identify, those kinds of people. Just so there obviously like different types of stakeholders. I love the idea of some kind of like Nielsen-esque handling, because ultimately that's really what you're trying to drive towards, is how can you make services fairer, more accessible, more transparent for citizens, right? So so that's crucial, but there's also definitely the city CIO, government AGs, a bunch of different people. So perhaps what might be a practical good next step is to just kind of identify, so who are some of the people, at least for now, that exist within the network of this group, at least, that would be amenable to being approached, to volunteer their time and know and their knowledge in the space, to try and map out what an ideal sort of way in which one might engage with the government as an individual, and then tracking the outcomes of that, or even tracking the current, how things are right now. I mean, I think that's important as well. But both sides, current state and future state, but just having a dialogue with those people and actually getting in the same room would be actually the ideal, so that they can all kind of map out what they see as being the optimal path for their given like kind of role within the system, right?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the resources that I think will be really interesting here is the Code for America Network, where they have a lot of CIOs and other folks in various cities across the country. Wow, that was a great little pivot there, Doc.
I know, I'm kind of like, woo! And we're moving back. So good one. And what I was imagining when Chris was speaking, by the way, is maybe when we get together to design the design of a challenge, we might say one of the first things would be, like a classic larger scale public works project or infrastructure, or like, broad neighborhood or economic or social impact kind of thing that you kind of work in there, like a design charrette with the city council and the key stakeholder groups. So if it was tax, you want the merchants and assessors and all those people. If it was transportation, how the drill, like you get like the manufacturers and the people with the telemetry and the third party stuff for the autonomous vehicles and that whole rigmarole, and the safety people, and just basically kind of just do the right kind of charrette to get people involved, and then start to hone, like in some IDEO-esque way, what the particulars of the project would be, and then obviously have a lot of Sandy Pentland, data-licious people around to ensure that we have the correct kind of like valid, verifiable, statistical and computational basis, so that we can map the right types of data and have a proper test of the data-driven kind of aspects of this, and then some success metrics and measurements and other types of like objective data, and the right types of measurements, so we can learn something. And the other part that we didn't talk about too, that I can imagine a charrette like that would be Christian Smith's particular brand of genius around individual identity systems and ways to express autonomy, slash sovereignty as an individual person, one who consents to be governed in a social compact that is digital. How do you do that? Like this chicken and egg issue here, but you go to the city that you're going to consent to for your identity. Well, consent's a two-party transaction. So what identity do people bring to the table in a city where they are somehow apart from the city, but also in the body politic?
Well, and I think Dylan's point earlier, maybe it was Damon, the conversation about constituents or users or citizens being compensated for access to their data. I think it could be really interesting if there's a way for people to share their data and sharing for public benefit that they all benefit from, i.e. with the city or with the community, is one thing. But then if there's access for other reasons, because somebody wants to build a shopping center or whatever, they would have to give consent for that use and potentially be compensated for it. I mean, we could talk for days about places to take this, but it could be really interesting.
It could be really interesting, yeah. And the idea of like sharing the wealth, I think was part of Christoph's idea, and we should talk about that. That's its own track, honestly, and the fairness and ways to administer that, and prevent city workers from walking off with pocket full of tokens and everything else, like or other wrongdoers that maybe blamed it on the city worker for real. They're not just saying so. All this stuff ought to be part of the design, like a system with public integrity and with verifiability, with accountability, and with reliability.
Mm-hmm.
So it can work. It can serve as a foundation, as an infrastructure upon which to build, the city on the hill, that shining city. Okay, so we need to go real soon. But let me ask Marcy, what do you think as a core collaborator would be the next step people could take? Like, would you be free to, if there was like a concurrent session next week at, we just lost Harrison and he's back. Okay. Would you be free if we had like, if you were a person that people talk to, like to actually get a Google Hangout,
Yeah, absolutely. And we can start a spreadsheet of maybe, and kind of segment the various pieces that are coming up, because this is going to be inevitably a huge project that I think lots of ideas will come to. So maybe organizing them in subgroups would be good.
Tabs and spreadsheets, and then named Marcy, who looks exactly like you.
Okay.
So, okay, that's great. Thanks, Marcy. So that you'd be willing to facilitate that next week, same bat time, same bat channel?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. That's one less thing that I'm not going to do. So that's terrific. God bless you. So now let's move it over to Harrison, so we can see if we can pull. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's gavel closed our second successful breakout group from MIT Legal Forum online, like refactoring itself in a digital form. Well done. This breakout group stands adjourned. Boom. Okay. Yay. Well done, Marcy. Okay. And now, and so last but not least, CEO Harrison Pearl from C4 Coin. Lay it down on us, Harrison. How do we do an automated legal entity? You're up. All we see right now is your coin, by the way.
Yeah. Hold on. How do I screen share?
Nice coin. Shiny coin.
Yeah, my camera doesn't work. But...
Okay. You can send me the link, or you can, the screen share, you screen share. So if you move your cursor around the screen, on the left, there's a green, like box near the top of the page. If you hover over it, says screen share.
Yep. I just found that. And yeah.
So while you're doing that, I'll not stall, but say two quick things, which is, I heard you use the word hackathon, and my antenna went like, what? Hackathon? That sounds fantastic. So I've got authorization by the power vested in me by Sandy Pentland to book a room where we can host your hackathon to do an automated legal entity at the MIT Media Lab, where it's extra super duper cool. What do you reckon?
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. All right. Back to you. Your screen is being shared.
Oh, it is now. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Do you see just this one page Google Doc so far?
Yeah, it's looking good.
Okay. Yeah. So this is basically what we started with when we wanted to break down, I guess, what's the core of an ALE, was we went back to that GitHub that we started, Daza, which I guess I should link in this document as well. Basically we broke out like what were some of the components that we had started to list that would be part of perhaps a larger functioning automated legal entity. Something that you said to me after the forum was, you're trying to make something that can run and walk and, interact with society, you should make something that is like barely alive
and that can breathe. Like,
right.
am I online? Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was off mute. So yeah, something that can breathe.
Yes.
Sorry.
No worries. So, so we started by just kind of listing some of those elements because we wanted to pull them apart and I guess make them less complicated. And I guess as part of that, we saw a through line of creating a cryptographically secure authorizing signature, because there's nothing really that should happen in here that doesn't have some kind of a signature involved in what's occurring, right? Whether you're signing the accounting documents at the end of the year or opening a bank account, resolving things, to add to the shareholders agreement, or, just interacting with vendors and the hiring process in general, and especially when you're incorporating the document. And I thought, looking into the definition of a signature, the important part was that it's both a proof of identity, but it's also a proof of intent. And I think that, off the top of our heads, we know that there are several digital identity protocols being worked on, and Sovereign, I guess, is one that's part of the group. But please, adding on to this list would be great. And proof of intent is something that I guess I haven't really laid my finger on exactly what I think that would mean in a digital sense. I don't know if that means that you would have to, especially if it's a digital entity, do you hash the decision, like somehow do you hash the decision that it came to, or do you hash the agreement that the decision was made under? Or is this something, that would turn into computational law, and something that maybe the Economic Space Agency would know more about, and maybe combining these elements could turn into a cool hackathon? And then, continuing this list here of trying to find what's really a valuable first hack that we can put together, and even just prioritizing various components that we can continue to work on in the future.
Here. So well done, first of all, on this. So it's accounting, banking, blockchain implementation, which let's call it even like the omnibus ledger of the entity, front-facing web portal, yep, governance mechanism for sure, HR employment, so how do you hire people on board, and by the way, off board, don't forget that, and then pay them when they're there. I manage them, tell them what they're authorized to do and not authorized to do. We'll come back to that in a sec. Project management, oh, well, that's it right there, and Secretary of State compliance and all the other stuff, city and the federal, and so this is a great list. I'd say that we ought to, oh, thanks, Dylan, for sharing the doc. I think we ought to just make that the starting list for your project of like, and that's better than the list we came up with in GitHub, I think, before. It's like more succinct. It's 8 things. It's not more than 10. I like it. One thing that you've got that I want to suggest, and hey, Christian Smith, are you on? Can you hear us? Click off.
Yes. Yes.
So 2 things. Number 1, we're going to aim to try to bring this like vote home like in about 3 minutes, so that it'll be 6:55. Which is before 7. And that's good. But Christian, something that Harrison said was like he was looking at what I would call primitives in law for a legal entity as a way to take seriously, which I'm grateful that you kind of honored like the feedback to take it seriously about how do you make it breathe. So that's a rudiment for process oxygen, move blood, digest nutrients. So a signature is what you came up with. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because with a signature, an entity can sign corporate papers, it can sign a paycheck, it can delegate authority, it's a mechanism, a base level mechanism, and a method by which it can express its existence. and also can express its lack of existence. So it can say, I'm doing an asset transfer and I'm dissolving my corporation. So it's a good rudiment. So I'd say bravo. And now when I think, oh God, well, like how would I even do that? The first person I would ask is Christian Smith, who thank goodness is on the call with us. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think there are a few elements to this, and I'll try to keep it really, really brief. One of them has to do with cryptography itself, and the ability to prove ownership of keys and know that the various aspects of the signature can be trusted for their authenticity. But there's another aspect of this that's quite challenging, and it sort of falls into that soft area that's a little bit hard to define. It's something that, Daza, you've called this ceremony, and in software design, especially application design, we talk about user experience, and I think that's a critical, very, very important part of solving that problem, because I mean, it would be possible to create an application that uses that prompts a user in some way to use their keys to sign something, and yet they don't realize what they're doing or what the effect of their action is. So that word intent is very, very meaningful, and something that we have to pay special attention to here is how do we design user experiences that have that ceremony that really captures their intent in a way that would have some kind of legal binding.
Sorry, we're having a off bar. People are aggressively in agreement with you in this room here, and that's helpful. So, like three of the things that you said that we should remember, and I don't know if I have access rights to the doc necessarily, but one of them is like I would call it attribution, basically. Like, how do you attribute the act from the signature? Oh, did I just hose the window? No. Okay, good. I thought I stopped that broadcaster. How do you attribute the key to an entity, like a legal entity and a person not acting on its behalf? And so, I don't know, maybe you could, like, at the Secretary of State filing, in addition to the name and the agent for service of process and the address, and maybe the incorporating, like, directors, you could just have the public key of the corporation, or several public keys, and blockchain addresses, or DIDs in the new parlance. And then you talked about the importance of having context and provenance of the meaning of a signature in a context. So, like, did a person appreciate that this was a mortgage? Did they have the right notices and alerts and warnings? Did they have enough information to make a powerful, like, informed consent at a certain time? So, we used to call ceremony, but ways to get something in a modal or something on the screen, and the sequence of things as part of what is signed. And there's some other, some big things we have to figure out in corporate law, Graham Leach Bliley and other things that may be that you want to make sure that a corporate executive is on the hook, and they have personal knowledge, that they've stood behind something that's also going from, like, a compliance officer. So there may be different dimensions of ways to ensure that you have a coherent way to collect and preserve evidence of what humans knew and when they knew it as part of the execution of their signature on these corporate documents. That's, I think, makes a lot of sense. You said a bunch of other good stuff too. Luckily, we're recording this, so we'll go back and remember. So, do you think we could play with the hack that you made for Digital Credit Union as a way to start doing signatures on things?
You better.
Yeah.
Also, we get to prove it if you guys don't play with it. Come on.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So Harrison, if there's some notes on that. One outcome is that if you tell me, like, when a comfortable date would be to hack on these 8 things and try to see how much progress we can get to something that we could pop out of a Docker file to try to spring into existence. And the time when maybe Christian he's under excruciating pressure, but a time when he could help us implement and integrate the signature hack as well, so that we could feed your concept of what the primitive would be for life support and breath of the entity. Then like, I'll respond positively to all that stuff and provide and like book the room and work with Christian and others so that we can support you here.
That sounds fantastic. I'm happy to follow up, and you can look for an email.
Okay, outstanding. Well, in that case, I think we have, Harrison. I think we have successfully accomplished the third and final online breakout of an MIT legal forum small group discussion session that has transmogrified from discussion to hacking into existence, a perfectly good project that will exist in time and space and can be engineered to refactor the law for digital age the way we like it. So thank you very much, Harrison. Thank you all for that great discussion. And I think as self-asserted chairperson of this, I will entertain my own motion to consider this session adjourned. Boom.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that we've adjourned all three sessions, we got to, can you shut that off? We have to, it's party time now. It's like, it's chaos in Harvard Law School. So thanks everybody. I think this was so successful. Oh, I'm sorry, Harrison, I forgot to ask you in after innings, if we were to do another session that was maybe like a planning session leading up to the hackathon,
yes,
would a Thursday 5:30 time slot work for that? So we
is
could
way better for me.
It's what?
6 is like 5:30 doesn't quite work, but 6 is great.
6 is totally fine. So because it starts within the window of 5:30 to 6, so that's easy, and you can just let people know it doesn't start till 6 and then it ends at 6:30. Like, to me, that's simple.
Brilliant.
Okay, and would you want to do that when, like in December or next week or
the first or second
28?
week of December would be great for us. We got a couple deadlines
Perfect.
coming up, so.
Yep. So if you could just keep me posted as soon as you know, and we'll lock it in and we'll put it on the schedule so that people know when your concurrent breakout will be.
Yep, I'll go through and I'll listen to the recording and I'll put some notes on the doc, and then I'll send a follow-up email with everything.
Dynamite. Okay, everybody. So 7 on the nosy. So I think that we ought to consider this entire shebang adjourned now. And I just want to thank you all for being such great friends and colleagues. Like, let's keep hacking over time. And much obliged. So with much gratitude, we're going to sign off now from Harvard Law School Berkman Klein Center. And then I'll see you next week, many of you and some new people from the Media Lab. So till then, happy hacking.